welcome to Navigating the Four podcast, where we discuss all things faith, healing, leadership, and communication. Exploring the topic of communication, I'm Matt Barker, and I'm joined by the other hosts of the podcast. Tackling the topic of faith, we have Freed Hardeman, Professor of Bible, Matt Cook.
Hey, guys.
Exploring the perspective of leadership, we have Assistant Dean of Emerging and Innovative Programs at Freed Hardeman, Mr. Jared Gott.
Hello.
And giving us the perspective of all things mental health, we have Director of the University Counseling Center at Freed Hardeman, Mr. Nathan Judd.
Namaste.
You always got to say something different here. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 1, which will dive into the topic of conflict without casualties, communicating through disagreements. And this is one that, for a communication kind of aspect here, this is one of the ones that I came up with. And conflict is one of those things that everybody has to deal with at some point, some more than others, depending on your role that you have. Sometimes you have to deal with conflict a little bit more. I saw a quote as I was kind of getting some information together for this episode. It was by Ronald Reagan, actually. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It's the ability to handle conflict by peaceful means. So thinking about how we approach conflict, it's not like if we do not have an issue or conflict with someone, it's not because it's not there. It's because we've probably worked really hard to address whatever conflict it is in a reasonable way. So a lot of that deals with communication. A lot of what we deal with conflict goes into play with leadership, with our church family, with mental health. All these aspects we deal with conflict. So one thing I did here, similar to how we did on the personality assessment, I had each of the hosts take a conflict style inventory is what it's called. And basically how you answer the questions, it tells you which animal you are, and each of the animals have a different style of how you approach conflict. So we'll start over here with Jared. And Jared, you can tell us kind of what animal it said that you were. Give us a little bit of characteristics of that animal, whether you agree or disagree, and if that describes you adequately.
Yeah, so my approach to conflict from this matrix is the owl. And it says that owls highly...
Who? Sorry.
Some creative minds at work. Owls highly value their own goals and relationships. They view conflicts as problems to be solved, see conflicts as improving relationships by reducing tensions between people, seeking solutions that satisfy both themselves and the other person. Owls maintain the relationship. I would say that pretty accurately describes me. I really haven't thought a lot about this until sort of doing this, but I don't really approach conflict as I have to win this. I don't think. I sort of see conflict as there is something that is impeding my own progress or hindering a relationship with someone else or another department or however you think of it. And so it's not so much something that needs to be won as much as it just needs to be worked through so that we can both get on in a better situation.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to your communication style. You're agreeing, correct? So
Correct.
You look at things as not necessarily problems to be solved, but you're looking at it in a way that how can we both figure this out so it can be more productive in the future, not necessarily how can I win, which would be more like a shark, but you're looking at it more from like standpoint where we need to both figure this out to be more productive in the future, I guess.
Yeah, I think that when I think about how I'm approaching conflict, it's that there is some underlying issue that's got to be addressed, right? Now, there are times, and I think it's kind of like the communication styles. I feel like there are times where each of the different conflict styles that we're about to talk about, you have to kind of shift into those, right? There are times when you're competing for something and you got to go in like a shark, or what little I looked at as far as a shark. You were competing for resources or different things, and so you have to go in and kind of manage that conflict that way. But normally I default to that owl type, which is there's something here that we could work through if we just can sort of deep dive into it and figure out the details of it.
Right. All right, Matt Cook, which animal did you get, and whether you agree or disagree with it?
Yeah, so this was not very helpful because I scored high on 4 different animals.
As did me and Nathan.
Yeah, so like a 13, and then a 12, 12, 12, and then the 5th one was pretty high too. So I am turtle, shark, bear, fox, owl. Just kidding. I'm turtle, bear, fox, owl. And as I think about why I scored high on all those, because all those seem different, again, I haven't reflected too much on this, and I think, and this may come up again later on, I think I am impacted pretty significantly in conflict by who the conflict is with.
That's fair.
Yeah.
And I think if I trust you, I'm willing to have conflict and even, go at it. You know what I mean? If I trust you. If I don't trust you, either to respond well to the conflict, if I don't trust you well as a person, if I think that maybe you're the kind of person who gets your feelings hurt really easy, if like a milder, quieter person who who can't deal with conflict, I won't have a conflict with you. And I can think even among my colleagues, I can think of the people that I'm glad to have conflict with, will step up and argue and with a smile on my face. And then I can think of a handful of people that I would never, if I had a problem with them, I would not go to them because I don't want to hurt their feelings. And I don't feel like they would respond well.
Yeah, I think personalities have a little bit to do with that, as well as just the context, like you talked about. If you're in a work environment and you know people a little bit better, if you're having a disagreement with your wife, you're going to handle those situations very differently, just depending on the context and the situation. All right, Nathan, what do you think?
Would you say I was a turtle?
I think you were one of the ones. You had a high ones in all of them.
Yeah. Turtle. Yeah, I was thinking about doing that. I had turtle, and then bear was in there. Turtles withdraw into their shells to avoid conflicts. No.
The counselor.
I know. They give up their personal goals and relationships, stay away from the issues over which the conflict is taking place, and from the people they are in conflict with. Yeah, just totally withdraw. They feel helpless. Man. And then the bear. I saw, you said bear, and I was like, oh, cool, bear. I like a bear. And then it's like their own goals are of little importance. The relationship is of great importance. I agree with that part. But anyway, so it's like a not quite as extreme as the turtle. Yeah, the bear. Those were the ones I had. Now, I will say, when I answer these things, it's like, what do I actually do versus what's natural? And I think I answered these from what's natural, but over the last few years have just been doing my best to become a healthier version of myself. In recovery, there's a phrase, keep your side of the street clean. And it's like, I need to communicate what my heart's saying. I can worry about how they're going to respond to that, but that's their side of the street. So I need to not worry about their side of the street. I just need to keep my side of the street clean. That's what I'm working on, but that's not what's natural to me.
Yeah. On mine, I've taken this many times. We do this in my small group communication class. I do this assessment to see who will work well together. If you have a bunch of students that are very much like, I want my way and I don't really care who I'm overpowering in the process, I know not to put them two together in a group because it'll just be, nothing will get accomplished. So I do this quite a bit. And I take, every time I give the students this assessment, I take it. And every time I take it, I get turtle. But I've noticed over the years as I've taken it, I guess more times I've had to deal with conflict. It's shifted just a little bit. I still have turtle as my highest one at 15. But then I actually have owl coming in a close second at 14. So owl is actually, when you look at the research that's been done on this assessment, owls is the, Jared, so you can say, I got the one I was supposed to get. Owls are the ones that are the most productive in handling conflict because you're compromising in the best way that you can. If you look at sharks, they're going to be trying to overpower the conversation and get their way regardless if the other person wins or not. And then if you look at turtles, that's not good either because the other person is overpowering them and they're not really getting what they want. So owls is what they call a win-win in conflict, where you're getting something, I'm getting something, we're able to find a compromise, and that's the best way to deal with conflict. Now, getting to that point, like Nathan said, that's the hard part. You have to figure out sometimes over time how to deal with different people, different personalities, different situations you're in, how to do that most effectively. So I think for mine, it was pretty accurate, getting hopefully maybe handling conflict a little bit better. Any other things to say about that, Jared? Did you have anything?
Listening to each of y'all's and going back to what Matt Cook had said, I do think it's somewhat situationally dependent, right? Like I'm thinking of part of my work is maintaining relationships with partnering schools and different things. And so there are times where I tend to be more on the, hey, let me just provide good customer service rather than let's dive into the root of an issue, right? If there's conflict and just try to be a good liaison with the university and this other school and sort of make other people hold hands. But I'm also thinking like there's times where, you have someone hit your car or whatever, right? And in that moment, my conflict isn't still like a shark or anything. I'm not getting out yelling at him or anything, but I'm also not like, well, let's sit down and think about the issues here. Yeah. It is very situationally and personality dependent.
Yeah. So a couple questions here. We'll start out here with Matt, Cook, Nathan, and then Jared, and then I'll kind of follow up with it. Why is conflict such a universal part of the human experience? What drives it, and why do we respond to it the way that we do? We all have different ways we respond to it, but it's kind of a thing that we all have to deal with at some point in our life. We can't really avoid having conflict. So why is conflict such a natural thing we always have to deal with, and why is it such a universal thing?
This isn't the only reason, but I think a big part of it is we are sinners. And I don't know, but I could probably look at the works of the flesh in Galatians 5 and say that nearly every single one of them, if we're practicing the works of the flesh, can create conflict in our lives.
Yeah.
Nearly all of them. Now, again, not all conflict is created by sin. Some of it's just because we don't always agree, right? And so that's fine. We're opinionated, right? But then how hard does that lead into pride then, right? So is it pride every time? I don't know. But you look at like the works of the flesh and say, okay, or the opposite of the fruit of the Spirit, how often does that lead us into conflict? I think that's kind of a natural reason that this is a part of the human experiences.
Yeah. We're imperfect people.
Yeah.
We sin. Yeah. And that's probably we could say that about a lot of things, but conflict is definitely one of
Here's
them.
a question. If we all were so full of the Spirit that the fruit of the Spirit just overflowed from our lives, would we ever have conflict?
Yes.
Probably.
Would we?
I think we would, yeah.
Yeah.
But
Wouldn't be as much as there is now.
no, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. But being full of the Spirit, I'm wondering if though that we were unified in all goals and all what we're working towards. I think disagreements are normal and not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah. Before you kind of, since we're going around the table, before you sort
Go
of
ahead.
deep dive, like I think we're framing conflict solely as negative.
Right.
And I don't think that's the case.
Yeah.
I think there is a lot of positive that comes out of conflict.
But comes out of conflict is different than saying in and of itself.
Well,
it is
I guess so. So, for just a ludicrous example, right? Well, let's say that each of us were sitting around the table and we were told, hey, you have $10,000 to do something to help, advance the church in some way.
we
right?
would disagree, yeah.
We would disagree. We would each have our own priorities or opinions
Yeah.
on how that could best be used and how that could best serve a community or people.
Right.
And not one of those is bad, right? But it's just our preferences.
Yeah.
And so we would have conflict, but the conflict isn't a negative.
Yeah.
Maybe, do we need to define the term? Is there a difference between disagreement and conflict?
Matt, define conflict.
So a conflict for me is this struggle between two people that depend on each other in some way. So like it could be with someone that you're married to. It could be a close friend or someone that relies on you in some way. And usually it's because there is a scarce resources is one of them, differences in how you perceived outcomes. So like if you have a different, like Jared was saying, if you have a different way you want to handle something than somebody else, there's going to be some struggle there. So it's kind of this perceived struggle, I guess, between two parties and trying to figure out how to deal with that. And to Jared's point, this is not necessarily a negative thing. We look at probably the word failure as in the negative context a lot. Well, you fail, but there's a lot of positives to failure as well. A lot of times the way that you learn how to do things better is by failure. Like the best way to learn is by failure. So we could look at conflict the same way. The best way to learn and develop our relationships is to have conflict because you learn. Just think about a marriage, right? The way that you know what people like or don't like in a marriage is usually because you have a disagreement about it. And the way that you deal with that conflict is a lot of times very positive. Now, if you handle it negatively, then it can cause damage as well. But if you handle it positively and do it the right way, then you can become closer and you can kind of know what each person wants a little bit better than you did before. So I think, yeah, Jared's right. I think looking at it in a positive light, which we'll get to here a little bit later on as well, I think naturally when we go through the assessment, most of us, I know me and Nathan, we got turtle. So we're trying to avoid conflict. And so if we're a person that our natural inclination is to avoid conflict, we're going to look at it more negatively. It's like, hey, let's just avoid that altogether. If you're like Jared, who got an owl, who's kind of trying to figure out what's the way we can both win, then you're going to look at it maybe a little more positively because that's the outlook you have on how can we accomplish this goal. If you're like me who avoids it, I'm like, I'm going to look at it more negatively probably.
Before you guys say whatever you say, can I reflect on your body language?
They're scheming over there.
No, they're like like Matt's sitting up tall and proud because Jared Googled the word conflict, I think.
It proves my point.
Matt's like pointing at the computer, like, keep talking.
Was my definition wrong?
No, your definition isn't wrong, but like I did Google the definition of conflict while you were defining conflict. And so like the very first thing that comes up is fight, battle, war.
All negative connotations.
All negative. And then a competitive or opposing action of incompatibles, antagonistic state or action as of divergent ideas, interests, or persons. The definition that I like, though, the one that I was going to point out before Matt kept pointing at my computer over and over, is this third one. And it's kind of a literary sense of the word, I think. And it says the opposition of persons or forces that gives rise to dramatic action. I'm like, okay, I like that one, right? Because positive or negative, conflict leads to something.
I'm glad you asked the question on like, let's define it. Because those first two, I wouldn't say, oh yeah, those are good. But yeah, I'm thinking more like disagreement. Matt's just nodding. He looks so smug.
Well, no. Excuse me. We're about to have conflict.
I actually thought about that. I was like, this is a conflict. Look at this.
Yeah, I just, for me, there's a distinction between disagreement and conflict. And I'm not saying all conflict is bad. I'm just saying often conflict, can conflict lead to good things? Is conflict natural? Will every marriage have conflict? Yeah. Will every eldership have conflict? Yeah. But I think, boys, you think about most of the problems in churches, in marriages, in our world, come from conflict that's not handled well. Anyway, so I want to be aware of, and then I don't know, this isn't a trump card or anything. Will there be conflict in eternity?
I don't think so.
If it's so natural and okay, then why not?
That comes from my other podcast episode. I don't think so.
Anyway, move on. I took that over just by haggling.
No, I'm glad
terms,
you asked it. I'm glad you asked it.
Weird.
And I was actually thinking like, okay, so then if we don't have conflict, is that good? You know, like,
no,
because we have to go into conflict. So I think conflict, when done well, is good and healthy.
No conflict breeds resentment.
Yeah, which is conflict. Yeah.
Right. And conflict is worse the next time if you avoid it and don't address it when you need to address it, which is something that I struggle with as being a turtle, I guess. But it's something that you realize later on. It's every time later on that if I would have dealt with this to begin with, it wouldn't have been this bad. You know, whatever relationship that you're talking about. One of the things I wrote down with why it's just a universal thing is we're all wired differently. We all have different personalities. We all have different things that we want, different outcomes that we want. And when someone has a differing point of view than us, it's just going to cause that disagreement, which can eventually maybe even lead to some of that conflict, depending on how you address it. And so it's just a natural part of life. We did the personality assessments. We all have different things that we value, different things about us that make up who we are. Everybody that we interact with every day has different things about them that make up who they are. And like Jared mentioned about this is an outcome that I want, but someone else might have a different outcome. How do we kind of come together and figure out what's best for all parties? So I think it's a little bit of that. I think culture and our background has a lot to do with that. The way that we address things is the way that we've seen our families address that. And so it's universal because everybody's family situation is different. How you deal with something is going to be different than the way others is. If you've ever interacted with somebody that is not a yeller or not someone that likes to discuss things because their family never discuss things, but then you are from a family that does, that can cause a lot of issues in whatever relationship it is, whether a friendship, marriage, whatever, because you just have different ways about how you approach things, whether it's conflict or just general disagreements. And so I think it's just a lot of just how we're made up differently, how God made us. You know, we have a lot of things that make up who we are. And our communication, our faith, all those different things, we have things that influence that. So what about when is it right to lean into difficult conversations and when is it better to step back? There's definitely some discernment that has to take place there. We can't just every time we're upset or every time that we have something that we want that the other person's competing against us, we can't just fly off the handle every time and just have an all-out argument or conflict. So there is times where we need to maybe address the conflict. There are times maybe we need to take a step back and figure out what the best way to approach it is. So Matt, from your standpoint, what are some things we can do to either lean into difficult conversations or maybe take a step back?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that Proverbs kind of gives some wisdom about avoiding quarrels, like Proverbs 15:1. That's a harsh word stirs up anger, so that's more about the response. But here's one, Proverbs 20 verse 3. It's honorable for a man to avoid contention, but any fool will quarrel. Right? So that's a reminder that, like, okay, your question is, how do you know? And there certainly is a time to avoid conflict. It is the wise thing to avoid conflict, especially with quarrelsome people.
Yes.
So for me, the answer to the question is, when's it better to engage? When's it better to step back? You got to ask this question. Maybe is a good question to ask. Is this worth it?
Yeah.
Like, is this worth it? Is this subject, whatever it is we're arguing about, is that worth it? And specifically with this person and the damage that it might cause, or on the other side, if we don't address it, if we don't address this and this person continues to do with the thing that they're doing, what damage might that cause? How might that ruin our ministry? How might that like cause division in the church if we don't like address a problem or a conflict? So is this topic worth it? And is the person that we're dealing with, will it be worth it? And there are some people, obviously, as Proverbs indicates, like, boy, like you don't want to go into a quarrel with that person because they will. If it's a person who posts everything that happens in their life on social media, like, is that the person you really want to? Probably not.
What about you, Nathan?
Yeah, I'm thinking about a lot of different things. And there's a counseling experiential exercise that I do where I talk about a window of tolerance and becoming dysregulated. And that's dysregulated is defined as when we're disconnected from self and or others. And so I'm thinking about this in reference to like making sure we stay true to ourselves. I'm not saying we need to run into every conflict guns blazing, but I also, and I mean, this is coming from the turtle, you know, I don't need to.
That's outside my window of tolerance.
Yeah, stay true to yourself, Matt. I don't need to sacrifice what's important to me just because I'm like worried about the other person. And it's easy for us when we say conflict to picture it as becoming this yelling match. But just stepping back, like if somebody steps in and does something that hurts me, it's okay for me to go, hey, I didn't like that. And it doesn't have to be some big thing, but it's okay for me to stay true to myself and bring that up. So I'm not saying we just look for that in every opportunity, but just a reminder that not all conflicts are these huge disagreements, but yeah.
Yeah. And a couple of things I wrote down kind of go together as far as when you should lean in, when you should step back from a conflict. Lean into a conflict whenever you have that clarity, you're clear-headed, you're thinking clearly. You should step back if your emotions are too high. If your emotions are too high and you're just thinking, oh, this is what I need to have done, and I'm very upset with whoever it is that's getting in my way, that's not a good time to probably engage in that conversation, because usually you're going to be thinking about it just from your point of view. This is what I want, and I don't really care what this other person wants because they made me mad, and I just want to get my way. So maybe taking a step back and maybe thinking through things. What is it that you want out of that interaction, that conversation? And if you realize your emotions are too high, maybe it's time to take a step back. And we've all been in situations where someone just really made us mad, and we tried to have a conversation right then with them, and it just didn't go over well because we were just really upset. In whatever relationship that is, it's just not a great time. So maybe taking a step back when those emotions are too high. Jared, what about you? What are some times we need to lean into the difficult conversations, and when do we need to take a step back?
I guess since it was covered from kind of each of our areas, I'll address maybe the leadership side. I think when you're in a position of leadership, there is a discernment that's already been talked about. You know, what's the benefit to this? What is the damage to this if it goes unaddressed? I think there are moments where a leader needs to create conflict. And what I mean by that is when you see that there is a situation brewing, when you can feel the tension between people, and you can see or discern that, yeah, this is going to become an actual problem. This is going to become something that is going to be unnecessarily damaging. Then there is something to going ahead and confronting somebody. Or not even, again, confronting even kind of has a negative connotation, right? But just going and sitting down and addressing the underlying issue before it has time to swell into something bigger.
Yeah.
And just going ahead and sort of cutting that off. So I think there are times where leaders have to go ahead and create the conflict before the conflict happens around them. I'm with Nathan. My thoughts are going in a lot of different directions. So I was thinking about, we had a class yesterday on the Beatitudes, right? And one of the Beatitudes is blessed are the peacemakers, right? And so we have this model of Jesus who is striving for peace. He is called the Prince of Peace. He is blessed are the peacemakers. That is his teaching, while also seeing Jesus who had conflict with various individuals throughout the Gospels. Now, mostly the Pharisees, scribes, those who were doing things that he was against. But it's not to say like peacemaking isn't the avoidance of conflict. And so there is nuance to when and where and how you handle that to create peace.
Yeah. Jared, you mentioned this earlier. We'll start with Matt here on this one. Conflict becoming a tool that can actually help us grow. Not all conflict is bad. Some conflict, if we engage in it appropriately, is good for you because it helps you resolve whatever it is issue that you have with another person, with whatever situation you're in. So how can conflict actually become a tool for growth, both in our personal lives, professionally, maybe in leadership, spiritual lives as well?
Yeah. Obviously, conflict is necessary and can lead to some good things. Often comes from or is because of something that somebody's done that they shouldn't have done, or a bad attitude or pride or whatever. But I'm going to address this relationally. My strongest relationships are usually with someone that I've had a disagreement with. And there's something about that disagreement or that conflict that kind of takes that relationship to the next level. Obviously, in family relationships, it's just going to happen, whether you want. It's going to happen. But I think more of like church and even like university relationships. I have the strongest relationships with people that we had to sit down and hash something out.
Yeah.
I can think of one person in particular who was a superior of mine who, this is years and years ago, I felt slighted by. My colleagues felt the same thing and stirred it on. And it kind of blew up to the point that this person really felt bad. It was overplayed, but they came to my office and in tears said, "This is not what was intended." Anyway, but like that changed our relationship because we had to have a heart to heart. It was not anyway. But when they came to my office and wanted to address this, it was like, oh wow, they care about this relationship.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think it can really help relationally to up
strengthens the relationship.
Yeah.
All right, Nathan.
Well, my thought was very similar. So I don't know how much to add, but yeah, I think I can think of people that I've had. Well, and even the knockdown dragouts, right? I mean, I was younger and a lot more argumentative. A lot of times I've left those situations a lot closer with that person. I can even think of a client I had. I worked with troubled teens, by the way, and I had this really disrespectful client, and I don't even remember what we were arguing about, but we were in the office just going at it, and that kid and I got a very close relationship. It is funny how that happens. But anyway, I just echo Matt Cook's response there that I've been closest with the people that I've been in the trenches with. Yeah.
Jared, you mentioned this earlier too, and I'll go to you next here for looking at it from a leadership perspective. But you talked about how a lot of times it's good to go ahead and address a conflict even before it's really known. And one of the things I wrote down goes along with that, so I'll let you kind of take over. But surfaces what is hidden is something that, like I wrote down, sometimes we don't even know exactly what it is we're upset about, and we don't know what's going on. But sometimes having those conversations that sometimes are difficult can bring up things. It's like, okay, I think I realize now why I'm upset, because we were able to talk this out. And before it got to a really big thing where everybody's just out yelling at each other, you're able to address it early enough to where you can kind of diffuse some of that, I guess, a little bit. So from an organizational standpoint, leadership standpoint, anything else you'd like to add to that?
No, I'm just thinking that conflict is so closely tied with communication, and in a lot of ways is a tool for communication. I'm thinking back to the example of, if we had a pot of money here, and I think why I'm thinking about that is one of the ways that conflict comes up with any organization I've ever been involved with is with something like a budget or a budget hearing, right?
Scarce resources,
right? Yep. There are only so many resources, and so it's very easy to perceive anyone else who are also competing for those resources as they don't care about what I'm doing, right? Or they think they're so important, blah, 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 blah. And it's not that, but they do have their own priorities. And so sitting down and talking through that is a conflict, right? But it's here's how I think it needs to be spent. Here's how I think it needs to be spent. Okay, well, why push so hard for that? Oh, well, because, and here's all the reasons why. And guess what? Those are actually legitimate reasons, not just, I want more. And so when you have opportunities to have that conflict and that communication, then you are able to gain perspective. And you actually see like, okay, we're all working toward a good goal. Now, sometimes you do get in the room and it's like, oh, you're just being a jerk, right? You just want more than anybody else. And that's not great. And then you have to, follow up that conversation from there. But conflict creates communication, which then can, create better outcomes.
So I have a couple of questions here just as we wrap up this episode. And I think the way I want to do this is I want to talk about some common mistakes that people make in conflict, and then we'll go to some practical strategies on how to maybe navigate conflict more effectively. So thinking about some common mistakes that people make, Matt, from a leadership or from a faith standpoint, maybe what are some things that people do in conflict as far as mistakes that they make? And we'll talk about some ways to maybe address that.
I mean, rather simply, harsh words or words with raised voices. That does not usually go well, and we could probably find some passages that remind us of the danger of those two things.
Like it. Nathan, what about you?
Is it Stephen Covey? Listen first to understand, then be understood.
Yep.
7 Habits. Isn't that? Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And, on the flip side of what Matt Cook said is, a common mistake that I see is people avoid the conflict, and that just festers and festers and festers until it turns into the harsh words. So
yeah. Leadership, Jared, what's a common mistake?
They kind of took mine, either avoiding the conflict entirely or going in unnecessarily aggressive and just creating an environment where productive conflict can't happen.
Yeah. Thinking about communication, one of the ones I wrote down was not listening effectively. So if you're engaged in a conflict, a mistake that I often make, and probably a lot of people do, is you're really not listening fully to the person that's talking to you. Mm-hmm. And instead, a lot of times, kind of what Nathan was saying, you're focused on what counter argument am I going to have to what they're saying? And you're not always listening to exactly all the ins and outs of what they're actually telling you. So you're just thinking about, okay, how can I have a good comeback to get my point across, and not really focusing on, I guess in a way, you're kind of filtering everything they're saying from your own perspective. And if we're going to engage in conflict effectively, we have to always be thinking about what it is the other person wants as well, not just how we want things to go and from our own perspective. So I think that's maybe a common mistake. So maybe what are some strategies we can do as just generally in our lives to address conflict more effectively? Counselor Nathan, what do you got on this?
Sure.
And how can we address conflict more effectively?
What works for me in going into conflict, now keep in mind I'm naturally a turtle. And so, turtle, thanks for the reminder. Is I have to sit back and reflect and ask myself, like, where am I? Is this something that I can work through myself? But when I decide, nope, I need to have this conversation, then I just commit to having a conversation and getting it started. So I've done a lot of things myself just to go, oh, this thing makes me nervous, so because of that, I'm going to do it. And that's even outside of conflict. But making a commitment to have the conflict and then just stepping into it. Yeah. That's what works for me.
And what about you, Jared?
I think conflict is like any other skill. You get better at it with practice to some degree. I think before going into a conflict, what I find to be helpful is to think through, what do I hope the outcome of this will be, right? And go ahead and sort of visualize, where do I want to try to get, or even, like there's a scale here of these different types. Where am I willing to get, even if it's not the most ideal situation, and sort of where is my, I will not, right, give up this or whatever. This is a non-negotiable. Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then just kind of, play through the conflict in my mind. Like if I start here and they say this, then what's my, and go ahead and think through it so that to the best of my ability, I'm not caught unaware by anything, and then can kind of play through, how would that go? Where are the points that I think I may get riled up? And go ahead and try to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah. One of the strategies, Matt, do you have one now, or do you still pass? All right, go ahead.
I'll go back to what I said earlier. I'm going to ask, is this worth it? Mm-hmm. And then number 2, when I'm in those modes where I'm a little nervous about the conflict, this goes back to what Nathan just said, just go ahead and step out and start the conversation. It's usually not as bad as I've imagined it to be.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's not gonna be as ugly or terrible as I've imagined this conversation to be.
Yeah. And mine goes back to actively listening, understanding the point of view of the other person. And I think Matt Cook talked about this earlier. Knowing who it is that you're talking to, knowing, who they are helps. Having that relationship, a lot of times if the best relationships you have are ones that you've had conflict with. So trying your best to understand the other person, where they're coming from. These assessments are kind of a fun assessment to do, but knowing how people approach conflict is helpful too. So if you know someone is a shark and they're just going to try to overpower you, trying your best to understand that that's the way they are and trying your best to find a way that you both can win. So I think it is a little bit understanding the person, having that relationship with them, but also just actively listening to them as well to figure out what you need to do to approach that conflict more effectively. What is one thing someone can do to prepare for a tough conversation that they've maybe been avoiding? And one of the things I wrote down that just helps me sometimes is I tend to write things down a lot. And if I'm struggling with whatever problem it is, whether it's a relationship, a conflict, or just something that I don't know exactly how to handle, writing it down and putting a name to it, I guess is what some people say. It a lot of times will help you have a little bit of clarity on what it is that the actual conflict is. If you have a conflict with another person, maybe writing some things down. Why is it that you have this conflict? And it helps you determine sometimes, is this really a big deal? Is this not a big deal? Am I just maybe looking into it a little too much? Am I in my own head? And it helps you to figure out what the root issue is a lot of times of that conflict, whether it be with a person, a situation, or whatever it is. So I think one suggestion I would have maybe for the listeners is just write it down, helps you have some clarity, maybe reveals the purpose that you have in that conflict. Matt, what do you got?
It's almost a softball question for the faith guy.
There you go.
But pray.
Yeah.
Isn't it funny that that's such an obvious answer, such an easy thing to do, and it's really easy to forget to do it when we're kind of fired up about something.
Nathan, what you got? Closing statement here.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I almost want to flip my 2 answers because I thought of another one for like what you can do in conflict. For this one, I'm thinking like preparing for it, like make the decision that you're going to do it. But a practical thing we can do in conflict, which maybe this goes with this one too, is to stay away from you statements and stick with the I statements. That's a big one. You just puts people in the defensive. And so I feel like I'm being targeted. I feel like I'm not being seen. Things like that is not saying someone's doing something. It's just saying this is my own experience and how I'm taking it. So definitely want to throw that out there.
Jared?
Matt took mine.
Oh, man.
I was
always
say
always the faith
Prayer.
guy taking them. So.
I can't talk about faith once.
It's his role, man.
You should get to go first next time.
Yeah.
I've gone first a lot. I don't want to go first anymore.
Gotcha.
Don't sacrifice what's true to you, Jared.
I'm not.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I'm going to go back here to the quote I mentioned at the beginning. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It's the ability to handle conflict by peaceful means, by Ronald Reagan. Conflict is something that we'll all have to deal with whatever situation we're in. So just learning how to maybe better be aware of it, better address it early on, and doing it in the right way, not when our emotions are too high and not when we're just very upset, but doing it in a way that both parties can win is definitely helpful. So we'd like to thank you for joining us for today's episode of Navigating the Four. We hope today's conversation sparks something real in your faith, your healing, your leadership, or your communication. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave us a review. Until next time, keep showing up, keep growing, and keep navigating the four. We'll see you next time on Navigating the Four podcast.